Welcome back to Moments That Matter. We're actually thinking about going in a different direction today. As Paul and I have shared over the last few weeks, there are some profound books that we have enjoyed and lots of books that other people have enjoyed that truly have had sort of a watershed moment in their lives. And so today we want to talk about one of those things with our special guest, Dr. Teresa Williams, who I also get to call my wife. And she is here with us today. Welcome, Teresa.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Now, I think this is going to be interesting because I have an inside scoop on the book that we're going to talk about today, not only because I have seen the book in a text form, but I've also seen it manifested in our home. So we're going to talk about something that I think is very exciting. But Teresa, would you introduce us to your book and author that has had a profound effect here in the recent weeks?
Sure. So the book that we're going to be talking about today is called Messy Minimalism. It is by an author named Rochelle Crawford. She has a blog that she actually started prior to writing the book called Abundant Life with Less. And I honestly had not been familiar with her or her work prior to reading this book, but it got suggested to me. And just after reading the intro, I immediately started plowing through the pages. And I think 2 days later, I was done and felt like my life had been forever changed.
And it's true, I got to see sort of an inside scoop. This happened during a very interesting season over the last month. But Teresa and I have always been rather intrigued by these TV shows where people move into tiny homes or they have to pare down their lives. And this, in a way, had the same allure, but it's had a very, very profound effect. What was that drew you initially to this book, Teresa?
I think, let me just describe to you kind of what the premise of the book is, and that might explain why it was so appealing to me. So minimalism, as many of you know, is just kind of this idea that you're paring your life down to the bare essentials. And with messy minimalism, the messy part of the book is that Rochelle will admit to you that she was somebody who had spent 34 years of her life accumulating all sorts of clutter. And she really didn't love the idea of minimalism where you are really seeking after a certain number of items in your home or certain things that you can and cannot buy. It's really this grace-filled attitude towards minimalism where minimalism is really just what she describes as the guide rail and not the destination, where it allows you to basically just live your life in a more abundant way so that you're really focused on what matters and you're not being distracted by all of the clutter that fills up our lives, both mentally and physically, with the number of things that we have in our home or clothes we have in our closet. And so for me, I love the idea of trying to pare down, but we are fortunately very blessed and we have a large home and we have a lot of things. And I try to do my best not to hold on to things that are not going to be useful. But our home, which is a beautiful home, has really become filled over the last 4 or 5 years that we've lived in it. And reading the intro to the book where it talked about this being an idea that we may be messy about it and it's not going to be perfection, but it's just this concept that we're moving towards to get rid of things that are not important, to get rid of things that are keeping us away from living the life that we want to live. And that to me was very appealing, that it's not about having a picture perfect Instagram home, but having a home that works for you and your family, whatever that means.
We've sort of been in this mentality and we have been attracted to the idea of minimalism, but then something happened a little over 5 years ago. Kids entered the picture, and that was a total game changer because kids just require a lot of things. And so we noticed, honestly, after we moved a few years back, so many more things. Now we've got 2 kids, seem to be in the home. Teresa, is it possible to have messy minimalism with a family?
I think a family requires messy minimalism. So Rochelle is, she's a mother of 3, and so she really can speak to that in the book. And she talks about strategies for minimizing with kids, because you don't just want to sneak in like a ninja in the middle of the night and throw away all their toys, even though we may be very tempted to do so. And I will be honest that I have done that in times in the past. But yeah, with kids, it certainly is difficult. They have lots of things. They have many things that they're attached to that you think are just silly, the toys that they got from their fast food restaurant toy box, dentist office toys, things that just seem like they're completely silly. But there is a way to kind of help involve them in the process. And I think to teach them going forward, hopefully to undo some of the attitudes and behaviors that we have developed growing up, holding on to so many things that are not really going to be helpful in your life, that you can kind of help involve them and help them to learn how to get rid of things that are not important. And it makes the things that they do have so much more valuable.
Let's get down to the nuts and bolts of the issue. What were some things that really stuck out to you that were easy to put in practice? Because I think a lot of times we read something like this, and then we see this mammoth task in front of us, and there's just sort of this mental disconnect between where to start and maybe even start providing the manifestation of some of these ideas in the home. What did you start with, and what were some practical ideas that you would suggest others use as they're starting their journey into this messy minimalism?
So there's actually a chapter in the book that kind of talks about the nuts and bolts of how to do it. And one thing that I think was great that she recommended was you make a list of the messiest areas of your home. And then you also make a list of the most used areas of your home. And any place where those two lists intersect, so for instance, the kitchen, that's probably going to be one of the most rewarding, but also one of the most difficult places to start. So don't start there. So she recommended starting someplace small that's easy. So for her, that was her closet. For me, I think it was similar, that I just started going through my closet. And that I think was great advice, just to start somewhere where you can see some change and grow some momentum and feel like this is not so difficult. Don't try and tackle the garage, which we have yet to tackle in our own home, because those things are just going to make you stall out, make you feel like this is not something that you can do. She had several strategies in the book. One other strategy that I thought was an interesting one, although not one she recommends for people with children, so not one that we have employed, but she said if it feels like it's too big to go through, spend an entire day going through something, what you can do is put a box in each room in your home. And whenever you come across something that you feel like is clutter, that is not useful, something that you're not wanting anymore, you just put it in the box. And then eventually when the box fills up, then you can take it to your local thrift store, ministry, wherever it is that you're going to donate. One other thing that she recommended, which I thought was great advice, was to think in your mind and identify places where you want your stuff to go. Because if you have an idea of where it's going, you'll be much less likely to let it sit in your garage for months, sit in your trunk for months. And if it's an easy place to get to, then it will just make it that much easier to let things go. If you're giving away things, if you have family members that you're giving old baby things to, all the more reason to get rid of it, because it's stuff that you're not using that somebody else can find very useful. So if you have that in mind as you're going through, it'll be much easier to let go of that potentially sentimental baby item that you're never going to use again, but somebody else is going to get great use out of. That would be extremely helpful. And so for us, we ended up, a lot of our donations go to a thrift store that's just down the road that supports a local mission. And I drive by it probably 5 times a day. So it's very easy to put things in my car and drop things off on my way. And I know that they're going to someone who's going to use them, and it's supporting a ministry that will be helpful to people in the community, and getting it out of our lives when we don't need it anymore. It's just taking up space.
I think this book qualifies well for creating moments that matter, because I've gotten to watch, although I haven't read it in its entirety yet, I've gotten to watch how it's been carried out in our home. So a few weeks ago, I was in the hospital and had an unfortunate series of moments that mattered in maybe a different way. And so I was in the hospital. Teresa was reading this book, and I came home when I was released and found a different sort of home. She had been terribly busy in doing a lot of work. And so I was immediately struck with how achievable it was, but also with the difference that it had already made in our home. So Teresa, as you started things out, what did you see were maybe things easier than you thought it would be, and maybe something more difficult than you thought it would be?
Well, just backing up a little bit, just kind of want to describe kind of exactly what happened and I think why this book hit at such an impactful point in our lives. So I started reading this book just days before Scott got sick. I actually finished it in the doctor's office. And as I finished it, I got a phone call from a nurse. Scott was there for a routine procedure, and I got a phone call saying that we needed to schedule a CT scan before I had heard anything from the doctor. And I remember thinking in my mind, as a physician, I know that that's not routine and not normal. So I assumed that that meant they found something during Scott's procedure that likely was going to impact our lives in one way or another. And so I had literally just read the last sentence on the page and I thought, okay, God, this is exactly why you put this book in my life at this point, because our lives are about to change in a very drastic way. And this book is helping me just think through what's really important for us as a family. And I think that's, again, why it was such a draw for me personally, because it's not just about stuff. It's not just about decluttering your home, but it's about focusing your life on what matters. So for me, that has meant putting timers on my phone and not looking at Instagram or Facebook as much, so that I've got more time to read things that are important, or more time to spend with my children, or more time to spend with Scott. So it's been about more than just decluttering that. And so we set up the CT scan, and 2 days later, Scott was hospitalized. And it was a pretty difficult day. I had just gotten off of work, working all night long, took Scott to the hospital the very next morning, and then I had my daughter to care for the rest of the day, and then trying to line up someone to cover for me at work that night. And that evening, trying to clean our house for my mother-in-law who's coming to town, because everybody knows you always want to have a clean house when your mother-in-law comes, even though it's in an emergency situation, you still don't want her to come into a messy home. So I thought to myself, man, if we had a decluttered home, this would be so much faster and so much easier. And in the midst of that, my daughter got sick. She had some stomach bug issues. And so all of this all in one day. And then at the end of it, our washing machine broke. And so it was just kind of this culmination of all sorts of things. And in my mind, I just kept thinking, if we had a simpler life, if we had less stuff, if I had time to really focus on what matters, it would have made today a little bit easier. And so I think while Scott was in the hospital, part of it honestly became about something to distract myself with, and part of it became something that I could control. I could go to a cabinet, I could clear it out, I could make it look really nice, and that would help me kind of cope with everything. So for me, it was a little bit of a coping mechanism, but I think it also was just realizing that life is precious and that there's no need to spend more time than you need to washing dishes and organizing Tupperware and trying to focus our life on just less stuff so that we don't have to be bogged down with those kinds of things.
You said well that this is not about stuff, and that has truly been the case, because it has taught us to have maybe a different perspective about things. And I don't want to over-spiritualize this book, but it harkens to a message that was shared by Richard Foster in his book on simplicity as a spiritual discipline. And simplicity for him was a way to keep prioritizing the right elements in their right place. And oftentimes that involved not just a mental and spiritual level and degree of prioritization, but also for things. And Paul, I've seen your office, and I feel like we're in communication with a minimalist here. And I've seen your home, and I've seen your workspaces. You might be one of the original minimalists before it maybe became popular here in the 21st century.
Yeah, I don't like mess. The physical mess reflects mess in my mind. And so I really try to keep things kind of cleared out. Yeah, not to ask too esoteric a question, Teresa. I realized that in collecting things, I mean, we've been collecting things, we've been married for 42 years. So we've had lots of opportunity to collect things. And some of it, you can't get around it. It's like the family says, hey, there's this thing. And it, of course, means something to whoever grew up with it. And so you're going to wind up with it. There's no question about it. But, sometimes it's unconscious. We just kind of build these collections or whatever it is. But you talking about your kids and their kind of crazy things that they collect, and they're so devoted to it. I wonder if some of this, like a motivation for this, sometimes is like a scarcity mentality. Like this is going to go away, or this potentially could go away. And if we don't have this, then we're not going to get this. Do you think there's any validity to that?
I definitely think that's the case. I mean, I think certainly I have been blessed in my life where I've not had a day where I've been worried about where my food's going to come from or where my clothes are going to come from. And so I think certainly there are people who unfortunately have experienced that. And I think that I'm sure it gives them a totally different perspective on the things that they have now. So I don't pretend to know what that's like to be in that mindset. But I think for kids too, everything that they have that's theirs, they love having this ownership over it. And it doesn't really matter what it is, but because it's theirs, it's special. And I think that can sometimes make it difficult for people to let go of things. She actually addresses sentimental items and how to best kind of, I guess, get rid of or give away those items. And when it comes to things that you've been gifted from your family, she will tell you that she drinks out of her grandmother's 70-year-old coffee mug because she feels like she gets inspiration from her grandmother, who was also a writer. And she said, if you can find a way to use those items, don't just box them up and put them in the basement where you're never going to see them or use them. Just because it's something that's sentimental, it shouldn't be buried underneath stuff. You should use it. And if you're not going to use it, see if anybody in the family wants it. See if it's something that they might find special. And if not, then at the end of the day, she said, at some point, this item is probably going to end up in a landfill, whether it's now or 100 years from now, whether it's you or your grandchildren who throw it away, someone's going to throw it away eventually. And if it's not something that's useful for you or your family, then it doesn't really matter when it gets to the landfill, it's going to happen. So you might as well go ahead and move on with your life and move beyond that item. And I thought that was really great advice.
Yeah, there are these times that we voluntarily, will give up things. And I think that's what you're talking about. There are also these times when we don't have a choice, like us going overseas as missionaries. And you talk about a total rethink. And me, I'm like, throw it away. I mean, just throw it all away. And Susan was like, this is not happening with my mother's stuff. You can throw away your stuff, but this is not happening with my stuff. And in the long run, I was really glad, because then we came back after 7 years and we have all this furniture, which I was glad, to give up. And now I'm getting ready to retire. And, so I'm looking at my office like, I don't want all this stuff coming home. And so, but I have to make choices, and there has to be a small pile that I keep, and there has to be a much larger pile that winds up in the dumpster. And I find myself just being very sentimental about things. It's funny how, of course, the kids are going to be sentimental about their toys. I'm going to be sentimental about books. And I know Scott knows what I'm talking about. And I look at my math books, that I've taught from for 39 years. And I just think I'm just going to keep that because I really care about that. And then I think that is dumb, I mean, like, just move on, man. So I'm facing these challenges, even as you're speaking to us about this book.
The reason the book has had such an impact is a few years ago, when the book was released, we read Marie Kondo's Magic Art of Tidying Up. And that was good, and it was translated into English and sort of became really popular at the time. And people started using these practices. One of them was hold up an item and ask, does this item bring me joy? Or am I just keeping this for keeping its sake? And that was a good book. And we read that back when we were living in Greenville. Well, then we moved, and we had 2 kids and all the things that come along with that. I can't tell you how many pages every day comes home from the kindergarten class. Pages of coloring, pages of little math problems. And there's always this idea in the back, we're so proud as parents of what our child has done. But then we know there are going to be 100 sheets that come home the next day and the next day. And so working through those is important. The sentimental things are important. But there was something, Teresa, that you said yesterday that the author mentioned, that if you didn't use it during the time of COVID, you're never going to use it. We were in our garage yesterday looking at things that were still in the box from when we moved nearly 4 years ago, realizing we've not pulled this out of the box to use it in these last few years, but something still said, oh, but it's good to have it here. And Teresa's commitment is so much stronger than my own, and out it went out the door. But what's been the thought process in your mind, Teresa, as far as what to hang on to and what to get rid of when it comes to the things that we have really an abundance of?
Looking at items and realizing we've got lots of items that can do the same thing. So that's one way that you can kind of look at your stuff and see. I think one thing that the author really talks a lot about is realizing how resourceful you can be. If you don't have an apple peeler because you decluttered it, you've got a knife that'll do the exact same thing. And so realizing that you don't have to be prepared for any and all situations. You don't have to be prepared for the 3 sets of twins that you're never going to have when you register for your wedding. That if you need something, you can get it, but there's no need to hold on to things just in case. And I do think that, this book came out in December of 2021, so it's fairly new, and she wrote it in the middle of COVID. And she said, if you made it through a global pandemic without using an item, you're probably not going to use it. And I think that was great advice because we have so many things that we've not touched. One other thing that I wanted to mention, I think one reason that this book resonated with me personally, probably more than Marie Kondo, although I did love that book, and I still use some of her folding methods and things that I developed after reading that book. But I think she mentioned that when she first started helping people declutter their lives, she had them write down their why statement. And I think that's something that in terms of habit forming, people always talk about what's your why, why are you doing this, and trying to hearken back to that and think back to that when things get hard and when you feel like you just want to give up on it. But she said she realized that actually was kind of a silly way to think about it, that it's not so much about your why, it's about who are you and who do you want to be? Because when your pride gets involved, you're going to fight tooth and nail for it. So for her, she's a Christian and she's open about that, and I loved that about her book. And she talked about how she wants to be a woman who can love abundantly and give generously, and that she wants to be focused on her family and focused on her love for God. And being a messy minimalist allows that for her. And so for me personally, remembering who I am and whose I am, I think helps me to kind of work through things when it's hard, trying to figure out what you need to get rid of. Is this something that's going to further my life in terms of eternity? And is it going to further my life in the kingdom? And if not, then I probably don't need it.
Yeah, I think it's been a tremendous process as we've started maybe reclassifying some things and looking at what truly is important. I think you said it well. It really is an effort to make room for the important things in life. I do think there's sort of that scarcity mentality, Paul, that you mentioned. I know with my grandparents, they lived through some pretty challenging times, and to have seen life during the Great Depression and to grow up during wartime. I remember my grandfather built houses, and as a young lad helping him out, I was responsible for picking up nails and bending them back out so they could be reused. And it was this idea that you don't waste anything, you don't get rid of anything. My grandmother washed the plastic dishes that we used, the Solo Cup Red plastic dishes that we used every year for our July 4th cookout. Those plates were put in the dishwasher and washed, and we used those same plates. But that mentality was you don't waste anything, you don't get rid of anything, because sometime down the road you'll use it. My father was the same way. He also was a general contractor, residential homes he worked on, and you'd find something that was a really good deal with building materials that you could get a little extra of and use it on the next house you're building, or a light fixture that came out of one house that you could put in another house. And so he passed away almost 6 years ago now, and we still have in my mother's house large collection of building supplies and enough we might be able to build our own house and start decorating that. But it's that idea of we're going to take advantage of what we can find now and buying in bulk and all of that, which I'm very guilty of. But this idea of making room for the important things, I think, was the undergirding foundational principle that was very attractive to us. And I can sing Teresa's praises because I've seen the outcome of her "we're doing this" mentality and her efforts, and how that has created a much more organized home, and it allows us to have far less time cleaning up and tracking down things that our two little girls can, in a tornado frenzy, tear out and pull out and tear up a room and fill up a room so quickly. Centralizing those things has helped out a lot, and it really has made a tremendous difference. But Teresa, if there was somebody who might be listening thinking, I don't know where to start, what would be your counsel to them?
I think I would say, you just start somewhere small. One thing that I struggle with, I don't think of myself as a minimalist. And one thing that Rochelle points out in the book, she said a runner wouldn't wait until they've run a whole marathon before they'd call themselves a runner. You're a runner as you're preparing for those things. So the day that you decide in your mind that you want to start to simplify your life, you can call yourself a minimalist. You adopt that mentality and you become that in your mind. And so I think just start at the beginning. Find a place and find who you want to be and who do you want to create your life after, and how do you want to move forward with simplifying things. And I think I would kind of say just start somewhere.
That's great counsel. And as we're wrapping things up, could you tell us again the name of the book and the author and where you read it from?
Yes. So the book is Messy Minimalism by Rochelle Crawford. It's available wherever books are sold. I was fortunate enough to be able to get it from Scribd, where we have a subscription, but it's available everywhere. And I did want to just finish out by reading one last portion from her book that I think kind of summarizes the mentality of the entire work. It says, your most valuable finds will look more like generosity buried beneath just in case, purpose lost behind monotony, curiosity beneath the need to know it all, presence behind distraction, peace beneath chaos, gratitude hiding beneath never enough, grace behind perfection, authenticity behind a facade, joy underneath control, adventure behind fear, resourcefulness underneath over-preparedness, creativity lost behind fitting in, faith under self-reliance, contentment beneath entitlement, community behind busyness, rest beneath keeping up with the Joneses, and an abundant life beneath an abundance of stuff.
Awesome. Thank you for being here. And we'll link this book in the description for those who are interested. And we'll see you next time on Moments That Matter. Thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to Moments That Matter, a podcast that looks at the moments in our lives that come along from time to time that have consequences long after the moment, especially those moments that have to do with the choice of vocation. In his book, Let Your Life Speak, Listening for the Voice of Vocation, Parker Palmer speaks of a clearness committee in the Quaker tradition, wherein a group of older, wiser people ask questions of someone considering a life choice as a way of clarifying the next step. We may not meet with a committee about these big decisions, but we all have these critical junctures in our lives, which we can think of as clearness committee moments. We need to pay attention to these moments because they are profound and potentially life-altering. We'll relay stories from our lives and interview others about theirs, especially noting the clearness committee moments, those we choose to recognize and those that were sadly ignored, those decisions that were made with God in mind and those that were not. Our hope is that these podcasts will cause you to think of the same kind of moments in your life with new clarity.